All right, we are so blessed today to have the fabulous Anandi Geroy, who will speak to us today on Vishnu, the preserver of the Hindu Pantheon. We realize she's been doing this series for a whole year. That's how many Hindu deities, and she could keep going too, and she will. She finds great joy in the art of the story, which she tells masterfully. She trained in theater at Northwestern University and went on to study Odissi, a classical dance form of India. Storytelling dance tradition is rooted in India's ancient theatrical forms and is practiced for centuries as part of the worship of India's largest Hindu temples. It incorporates a highly stylized vocabulary of music and movement. She lived in India for 7 years, studying dance, percussion, language, culture, and religion. She teaches theater and dance for kids here in Taos, and she also has done so in India and San Francisco, and has adapted a number of folk tales from across the world for the stage. She enjoys working with children, teaching dance, theater, and folk arts. And I am excited to hear all about Vishnu from you. Mwah!
Yay, thank you so much.
Yes.
There you are. Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, not really. It's all kind of like, there you go. All right.
Great. I mean, you guys can hear me anyway, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's wonderful to be here as always with this intimate group, and it's lovely. And I have been doing this for a year, and it's really a wonderful thing that I look forward to. So thank you again for giving me this opportunity to share what I love. And we started the last 2 times that I was here, we talked about 2 of the members of what's called the Hindu Trinity. That's Brahma, the creator, and then we skipped to Shiva, the destroyer, because last month was Shiva's special holiday, Shivratri, so we talked about Shiva. So we're going to go back to the middle one today and talk about Vishnu, who's the preserver. And as the preserver, there's lots to say about Vishnu because he's very sort of active in the world. The word avatar is a Sanskrit word, and I know it's come to have a big meaning in our modern time and culture, but originally that meant sort of an emanation of a divine being that incarnated onto the earth for a special purpose. And so Vishnu is famous for his avatars. Brahma and Shiva don't have avatars in the same way, though Hanuman, actually, who we just mentioned, whose birthday is now, is an emanation or incarnation of Shiva that came to spend some time with Rama when Vishnu incarnated as Lord Ram, who's one of Vishnu's 10 incarnations. Shiva wanted to come along for the ride and come have fun and be a part of that. And so he came as Hanuman, his most devoted monkey servant. But Vishnu, we'll talk a little bit about Vishnu as himself, as the preserver, and some of his iconography, and sort of get into his incarnations. And I'll probably actually keep talking about the incarnations of Vishnu for the next at least one more time, because they all have wonderful stories. So as far as Vishnu himself, that name, the word Vishnu, means one who pervades all things. So Vishnu is seen both as the energy sort of emanating creation, that which is within creation, and then also kind of the omniscient, omnipotent mover of the elements of creation. So he's seen in both ways. Vishnu has a huge following in India, as does his most famous avatar, which is Krishna. So for those who are Vaishnava and who follow Vishnu as their supreme deity, they believe that he's sort of above Shiva and all the other incarnations. They're all sort of parts of him, and Vishnu is kind of the omnipotent, highest deity. Those who believe in Krishna also say that Krishna and Vishnu are one, and that Krishna is not actually one of the avatars of Vishnu, but that he's kind of enjoys the same status as Vishnu himself. So there are different versions because of that of what the 10 incarnations are. Some include Krishna as an incarnation, Some say that Balaram, who's Krishna's elder brother, is actually that incarnation and not Krishna, because Krishna is actually the supreme being. Some versions include Buddha as one of the avatars, and so that's a great example of the syncretic nature of Hinduism, that it kind of like enfolds and adopts all things sort of into itself. In Orissa, where I lived, Jagannath was also seen as one of the incarnations, and he is a local deity. And he's also important for kind of pan-Hinduism, but his temple is on the eastern coast of India, and he's one of what's called the Char Dham, which is the 4 abodes or seats of Vishnu. One is in the south, and then he's the one on the east. There's one on the west coast, which is Dwarka, where Krishna ended up living in his later life with his wife Rukmini once he became a king, after he left all the wonderful cowherd Gopi maidens. And we'll talk about Krishna. I'll definitely do a whole day on Krishna too. And then there's one in the north. So on the east coast, Jagannath Puri is a huge Hindu pilgrimage site, and that's where the dance that I learned came from, that temple. And so all the stories that we used to, it was a lot of medieval Hindu, it was Sanskrit poetry that we would dance and tell the stories of Krishna. So Jagannath is seen as kind of an equivalent of Krishna, but he also, I'd say maybe I'll do a day on Jagannath. There's Buddhist elements. There's actually tribal elements, because Orissa had a lot of tribal or Adivasi people. So in the hill country of Orissa, which is sort of this impenetrable hilly jungle, which hasn't had a lot of contact with the world historically, that tribal pre-Hindu religion was also sort of incorporated into Hinduism in the state of Orissa. So Jagannath has, there's also some tantric and Shakta elements from Bengal down through Orissa. They call it the Shakti belt. And so there's a lot of goddess worship that happens in there, and a lot of tantric left-handed path Hinduism. So that's incorporated into the iconography of Jagannath. Anyway, in Orissa, Jagannath is seen as one of the 10 incarnations. I actually brought this book. I don't know if you guys can see this, but little images of the 10 incarnations, or just avatar of Vishnu. And the stories of the 10 incarnations, we had a lot of dances that we would do about those stories.
Is Jagannath, whatever that you just said, is that where we get our English word juggernaut from?
Yes, it is. Okay. It is, because I'll tell you where it comes from. There's this festival that happens every year, the Chariot Festival, where they take the 3 deities, Jagannath, Balabhadra, and Subhadra. Balabhadra is the form of Balaram, who I said was regarded by some groups as the actual incarnation of Vishnu instead of Krishna. So Balaram is Krishna's older brother, Balabhadra is Jagannath's older brother. And then they have a sister, Subhadra. So it's 3 deities. They're actually wooden murtis, wooden carved statues in the temple, which is sort of rare. So every 12 years, they have to replace the wooden statues. And there's this whole ceremony around that, where they choose a new big tree, sort of by divine guidance. They choose these big trees in the jungle and fashion new statues out of them. But every year they take the deities out of the temple and put them in these massive chariots that are, I went to that festival a couple of times, and it's insane. There are hundreds of thousands of people crowding into this old city, and it's this big road called Borodanga, which means big road. The deities come out, are brought out with lots of pomp. They do this kind of waving motion, and actually our dance takes a lot of movements from those processions and stylize them into dance choreography. So the deities kind of brought out like this, waving out of the temple and placed in these chariots, and the whole thing is like very ritualized and goes on for hours. And they're fanning them, and then the throngs of people are just like crowding and pressing and smashing in, and then they take the chariots and they pull them. They're called rathas, and so the thing is called a ratha yatra, the journey of the chariot. And they pull them with these huge ropes, and so it's really auspicious if you get a chance to get yourself onto the rope to help pull. So everybody just rushes for that and grabs these ropes, and they're really heavy, and just the whole crowd is like pulling these 3 chariots down the road. It's very impressive. So that's where Jagannath comes from, this idea of like a big I guess the British sort of saw it as a kind of like war machine, and it looked really bloodthirsty or something, because that's where that etymology comes from. But Jagannath himself actually has these big eyes that are really interesting. We'll talk more about Jagannath another day. But he has these big eyes and a big round smile, but it's this red sort of gash-looking thing across his face. Like, it's very tribal, actually. Is where the kind of like the look of Jagannath comes from the tribal people. So I think the British, sort of saw this as like this crazy, like bloodthirsty god going in this huge thing down the road, and we have to look Jagannath. But it comes from Jagannath. He's actually very compassionate being, and a form of Lord Vishnu or Krishna.
It's a big vehicle. We'll assume it's a war machine.
It's a war machine.
Proper British style.
Yes, exactly. All right, so Vishnu means one who pervades or who has entered into everything. And another name for Vishnu is Narayana. Nara means humanity or mankind. Nara means man. So Nara, Nari, man, woman. Narayana means the one who is the abode of all humans or all Naras, also the final goal of all humans. So that name, which is another name for Vishnu, means that. It also means the one who has made the causal waters. Well, we've talked in a few different stories about the ocean of milk, the Kshira Sagar, it's called, which is kind of like the primordial stew from which all creation emerges. And so Narayana lays on this ocean, and he lays on the serpent named Shesha. So that's also part of his iconography. His wife, Lakshmi, is pictured at his feet, sort of massaging him as he's laying there. And so that's where he lays, in between the ages, right? So after the destruction of, so everything is cyclical, like time really is, right? So as day and night kind of cycles in Hindu cosmology, creation and destruction all cycle. So there's never really an end. It's just trying, from the beginning. And so after many eons, the akarma, or the unrighteousness, pervades the world, and then the universe is destroyed, and some seed of the creation is kept in order to grow it again. And so actually Sesha, that name, his serpent's name, he's called Ananta Sesha. Ananta means endless or eternal. So that is, he represents cosmic time, which is eternal and endless, infinite. So he's this infinite serpent, and he's got 1,000 hoods. And Vishnu lays on that serpent in these causal waters after the destruction of the universe and before the next creation of the universe. And when he begins to dream the next creation, this lotus pops out of his navel, and on the lotus sits Brahma, the creator god. And so for the Vaishnava world, Vishnu is actually the creator who creates the creator. So for those who love Vishnu, he's got number one. And then Vishnu instructs him about the next creation, and he begins to dream it, and he creates mind-born sons and mind-born reality. And that's where the creation comes from. But there has to be a seed of the previous creation in order to create the new creation. And so Shesha, also means remainder, or that which is left over. So the serpent is really important. He represents also all of the souls in their disembodied form that came from that last creation that need again to be reincarnated to continue the journey. And so Sesha, or the remainder, the seed of the next creation, represents that too. So he holds that potential. And also there has to be a snake. So a snake also represents desire, as in sort of the Adam and Eve story as well, and kind of like a lot of universal mythology. The snake represents desire in the Hindu world as well. So in order, or kama is the name in Sanskrit, in order for creation to occur, there has to be initial desire. And so that happens on all kinds of levels. Sexual desire, creates creation the way that we do it. But there has to also just be this desire to create. That's the artistic desire, and it has to be also present for the God being to have a desire in their mind. Yes, let's regenerate this creation. So that Sesha also represents that. So he represents that desire that's also present in God to make the world again and the seed of that future creation. And he also he holds creation on his 1,000 hoods. And so the 1,000 hoods also represent the divisions of time that are like endless divisions of time, because time is infinite, but it's also infinitely dividable. So creation is held within and created from time. Time really constrains this universe, this world, it rules and governs it. So the creation is held on these 1,000 hoods that represent that endless and yet endless and dividable nature of time. So that is sort of the cosmology of Narayana, lays there on the cosmic ocean. And then there's a famous quote that I'd like to read to you, and that is from, where did I write? Yeah, this is from the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhagavad Gita is the song of the God, the divine song in Sanskrit. That's when Krishna was on the battlefield in the Mahabharata, and he was instructing Arjuna, who was a great warrior of the Pandavas, who didn't want to go into battle. We can talk more about this in the Krishna Day. We'll talk about the Mahabharata on its own. Arjuna says, I don't want to go to battle. I'm going to battle against my kinsmen, which really just means I'm going to battle against other human beings in this, what's called a kshetra, the field of battle. But also this whole universe is seen, and if you look at quantum physics, it's also seen this way as a field. So this field in the Mahabharata, the battlefield, is also an allegory for the field of the created world. So within this field of battle, there's all of the play of consciousness, the play of events. And so Arjuna is saying, in some ways he's saying, I don't want to participate anymore in this play that just creates karma. I want to be beholden to my past deeds and have to be acting on my past karmas. I don't want to be creating new karmas. I want out of this. And Krishna basically convinces him, no, you actually have to fight. It's your dharma because you're a warrior. So that's the purpose that you came into this earth for. And it's all ordained and you have to do it. And so it's a whole long story about how he convinces him. But part of what he says is at some point he shows his true nature. So Arjuna just thinks Krishna is his buddy. He just thinks like, oh, this is my friend, and he's offered to be my charioteer, and they were childhood friends. And during the Bhagavad Gita, he reveals his actual divine nature, which is overwhelming and huge and massive. And he sees he opens his mouth, and like all the horrors and wonders of the universe are there. He sees his huge jaws as the jaws of time. Everyone goes into them and it's crushed. And Arjuna is just completely overwhelmed by this cosmic vision. And Krishna also says, look, as Vishnu, I have to come into the earth whenever it's needed. I come as an avatar and I right the wrongs. And so that's also part of what I'm doing here. That's why I'm actually Vishnu, but I came as Krishna, and I'm here to right the balance of the universe. So here's what he says, this really famous quote. It says, Yada yada hi dharmanya glani bhavati bharata abhyana madhamyasya taram manasam shri jamaham paritrayana sadhana vinascha dushkritam dharma sangha saparnathai sambhavani yuge yuge. And that means whenever there is a decay of righteousness and there is exaltation of the unrighteous, then I myself come forth for the protection of the good, for the destruction of evil, for the sake of establishing righteousness. I am born from age to age. And so, we have these 10 sort of famous incarnations, but in Hindu philosophy, that could happen anytime, anywhere. And we might not even recognize these incarnations. This is basically the divine force saying, let me help you, let me guide this creation. I'm going to come and manifest myself. And it's all of us, really. I mean, we are almost divine incarnations too. So we have those divine qualities. And within us is that whole kshetra, the whole field, all of the battles and the back and forth. It all happens in our own hearts as well. So these incarnations have their stories and iconography and different meanings. But it's also, again, an allegory for creation itself. And, they say I think there's some Buddhist stories about how you might not recognize a light being. It can come in any form. They can come in time and where it's often the most kind of hidden, or that which awakens compassion in us. Whenever we see, maybe it's an elder or a child or someone we meet, we just have to be open to that, to see those divine incarnations, in our lives all the time, every day, when they come to us, and not to be too just caught up in our minds or what we thought we were doing, or where we thought we were going, or what we thought was important. But to know that the divine is always here manifesting itself. And so really that's Vishnu's job in the Hindu pantheon. He's the one who helps us in a very concrete way by coming to the earth to manifest and sustain us. His consort Lakshmi, she's the goddess of wealth, grain, of harvest. So literally she is sustenance, and also she is auspiciousness and all the wonderful blessings in our life. She represents that, and so Vishnu is associated with that. He's the energy of the divine that really wants. It's really rooting for us. Has our back. Wants us to survive. Wants our species to survive. Wants creation to survive. But again, in the cosmic cycle, at some point, when things tip too far, sometimes it takes something really intense to right it. So there's that too. We are to that.
What was his last incarnation?
So his last incarnation is yet to come, and that is Kalki. And Kalki is supposed to arrive at the end of the Kali Yuga, which is our current age. Which who knows how long that really is. People talk about different lengths of that and how close we may be to the end of it, or not. He's supposed to come on a white horse with a sword and vanquish the unrighteous and save the righteous. So
come on down, Vishnu.
Yet to come. But I want to go through a little bit of the incarnations. Oh, actually, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit more about Vishnu's iconography. So as Narayan is laying on the serpent, he's also often depicted as a male being with one head and 4 arms, and the 4 arms are holding 4 things: Sankha, Chakra, Gada, Padma. So the Sankha is the conch, which in Hindu temples we blow the conch and make a sound, and it's also like on the battlefield, it's blown as kind of like just a celebratory way to wake the gods and call everyone to alertness. The Sankha actually represents the 5 elements. The Chakra, which is his weapon, it's a circular.
A wheel.
A wheel. Yeah,
Yeah.
Chakra means wheel. It's a discus. He kind of holds that on his finger and throws it like a.
Xena, the warrior princess, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's that. So he holds that, and that represents actually the turning of the cosmic mind. The Gada is what Hanuman holds. That's a mace, and that also represents the cosmic intellect. So the Gada is associated also with the Vajra, the lightning bolt, and in Vajrayana Buddhism, they often have like it's a Vajra, like I don't know how to explain that. It's like a 2-sided thing that is supposed to represents the lightning bolt of kind of awakening. And so Hanuman's Gada represents the lightning bolt of awakening, but also like the strength of the intellect, the ability for the intellect to pierce through reality to reality. And then the Padma, which is the lotus, which I love the symbol of the lotus. It has so many meanings embedded in it, but in this context, it means the unfolding universe. And so, and the ever growing, ever unfolding, ever becoming more and more complex and beautiful, and perfection and creation. So the lotus comes from the navel of Vishnu at the beginning of creation, and sort of as the eons continue until the next cosmic dissolution, that lotus is just like slowly unfolding. So that, and then because he's got 4 arms, that represents the 4 directions. He's got a lovely little curl of hair on his chest. He's also very beautiful. He's very attractive. So we are meant to kind of like find an enjoyment in his being. not like Shiva, who's very scary, really. And he's covered in ashes from the cremation ground. You cannot forget your mortality when you look at Shiva, covered in snakes. So he's the one who says, don't forget your mortality. Don't forget, I'm the conqueror of death, but I also represent death, and I'm the fierce aspect of creation. But Vishnu is not like that at all. He's very like soft and warm and compassionate. And so we can really relax into the being of Vishnu and just take comfort from his energy. So he has this lovely curl of hair on his chest, and that represents the objects of enjoyment, basically nature, the natural world, and all of the products of nature that we enjoy and love and that sustain us. So that little curl represents that. And then around his neck, he wears this beautiful jewel called the coast of a jewel, and it's a gem, and that represents us, the enjoyers. So the enjoyers of the senses and the sensual and things which are enjoyed are like conjoined on his chest. And that also represents that for him, this duality of the world of the enjoyer and the enjoyed, this idea that we are separate from anything and that we actually connect to it through our five senses, that we are individual beings, which is really like the illusion of ego. He just wears that as an ornament. So for him, it's just like, that's just a lovely thing I'm going to wear, but it's not something that's going to bind me. He doesn't wear it like shackles, he wears it like just for fun. Like Shiva, conversely, wears snakes as an ornament. So for him, death is like that. And for Vishnu, enjoyment is like that. So just, for these beings, and for, it's just the idea for us too, that we don't have to attach or connect so much, that we just can wear it all as an ornament. This life, this body, we wear it for a while, and then we let it go. It's an ornament. It's something to, pick out in our closet and enjoy for a minute. So that's what that represents. Then he's got also this beautiful garland of never fading flowers called Vaijayanti Mala. And that represents the sort of the subtle essence of creation that again manifests into physical reality, but it's the subtle essence, the way that flowers have a smell, like a fragrance. It's their subtle essence. And so that's the representation of that. So I'm going to go into the avatars just a little bit. So the first one is the fish, and it's interesting, these kind of follow like an evolutionary model a little bit from sort of simplest life form to most complex, ending with humans. But the Matsya avatar or Meena avatar is the fish, and the second one is Kurma, Kashyapa avatara, he's the tortoise. So that's fish, tortoise. The third one is the boar, Varaha. The fourth is Narasingha, he's in half man and half lion. So that's sort of moving from animals to humans. Then the next one is Vamana, the dwarf. After that comes Parashuram. That's called Ram, who bears an axe, which isn't the Ram from the Ramayana. He's the next one. That's Prince Ram. So there's another Ram, Parashuram, as the axe bearer. And then after Prince Ram comes the kind of debatable avatar, maybe Krishna, maybe Balram, depending on who you follow. And then after that comes in Orissa, which is where I have most familiarity with the avatars. We think of Buddha as the 9th avatar, or Jagannath. And then the 10th is Kalki, the one that I mentioned, who's supposed to come with the horse. So I have a few minutes. I want to tell you guys a couple of these stories of the avatars because they all have wonderful stories. So I think they're so wonderful, all of them. I probably just choose one today. I think I'll do the dwarf. The dwarf is cool. Vamana. So the dwarf's story. Once upon a time, there was what a paper that fell. There was there was a king named Bali, and as many kings did, he got all these wonderful boons so that he would be very strong and invincible, and he conquered all the worlds, and he was very proud of himself for that. So he kind of represents the sin of pride. And Bali actually unseated Indra, who's the king of heaven, And of course, when you unseat Indra or any of the gods, they get very uppity about it. We do not like that at all. So they kind of got together and said, wait a minute, Indra doesn't have his home anymore, and Bali has taken over, and he's just so he just thinks he's so cool. We can't have this. We've got to do something about it. So they approached Vishnu, and Vishnu said, yeah, I do need to calm Bali down a little bit. He's gotten a little bit too big for his britches. So I'm going to come in the opposite form, and I'm going to come as a dwarf and teach him a lesson. So Bali was very proud of his generosity. It's like one of those philanthropists that just really happy with how much they have to give. They're doing a wonderful thing, but if it's motivated from pride, and this is the story there that your motivation has to be really pure and generous when you give, and not come from wanting recognition for your own self. So this Vishnu incarnates as a dwarf, and he comes to him by the name of Vamana, and he comes and says, oh, great King Bali, I've heard that you give anything that someone asks for, so I'm wondering if I can get a boon from you. And Bali was like, oh, you're so cute. Yeah, sure, I'm happy to give you something. What can I do for you? Can I give you some jewels? And he said, no, I don't want jewels. How about a palace somewhere? No, I'm okay. I don't need a palace. I'm really humble. I'm just this little guy. Actually, all I want is 3 steps of land. And the king says, what? Look at this. He just wants, what a dunce. Not only is he tiny, but he's not very smart. I've offered him all these things, and he only wants 3 steps of land. And he was like, are you sure? And the dwarf says, no, that's all I ask. It's all I need. So he says, sure, I grant you 3 steps of land. Well, he didn't know he was dealing with there. He's dealing with Vishnu, and Vishnu is infinitely huge, actually. So this dwarf takes his foot, and with 1 step, he covers, because there's 3 worlds in Hinduism, the underworld, this world, and the heavenly world. With 1 step, he covers the earth and the heaven. And Bali's like, uh-oh, I think I messed up here. The next step, he covers the underworld. So everything is covered with his steps, all of creation. And then he says, where should I put the 3rd one? And Bali realizes, that he's been duped, and he realizes why, and he gets his lesson, and he says, why don't you put it on my head? So on the 3rd step, he puts it on Bali's head, and he actually pushes him down into the underworld. And then there in the underworld, he becomes the ruler, and he kind of has his own, he's allowed to have a kingdom there by virtue of the boons that he's won, but he's way humbled, and he knows his place. And so that's the story of Vamana, the dwarf incarnation who humbled Bali. Let's see, I can tell you guys the fish. The fish is the first incarnation, and the fish, this is like sort of like the biblical story of Noah's Ark. In this story, there was a sage who one day went out and was doing his daily worship at the river, and he picked up water to make an offering to his ancestors, and there was this tiny little fish in his hand. And he went to go put it back, but the fish said, no, please don't put me back. I'm worried about all the big creatures in the water that are going to eat me. Please give me a safe place to live. And so the sage says, oh, a talking fish. And he takes him home and puts in his kamandalam, which is like, if you see pictures, actually Vamana, the avatar, the dwarf avatar that I just told the story of, he carries a kamandalam as one of his, he's a Brahmin. He comes as he's a beggar, like a real simple Brahmin man, like a simple spiritual mendicant sort of. They carry these water pots. That's one of the things that they're allowed to have when you've kind of renounced all possessions. You can have a little water pot and like a staff. I think that's all you are allowed. So the kamandalam is a water pot, so it's a sacred water pot. And so this sage had one of those. So he takes the little fish home and he puts him in the water pot and says, okay, you can live here. And he goes to sleep. The next morning he wakes up and the fish is grown, and he's so big now that he's taken up the whole water pot and says, help, I need more space. I'm too big to fit in here. So the sage says, oh, I'm so sorry. And he takes him and he puts him in like a big trough of water. And then he goes about his business and he comes back. And when he gets there, of course, the fish has grown again. And he's as big as the whole trough. He says, please help me. I'm so big. I need a bigger place to live. And so he takes him and he pours the trough into their local, like, kunda, which is like a pond that they would have in the village for bathing and getting your water. So he puts him in there. goes to sleep, comes back the next day. The fish is so big, he's taken up the pond, and it continues until finally he doesn't have anywhere to put the fish. He puts him in the huge ocean. And the fish is like, don't leave me here in the ocean. I don't want to be eaten by all the alligators and aquatic creatures. And the man says, yeah, I don't think so. Who are you actually? Because for one thing, you talk, and I was going to let you get away with that. But now you are telling me that you're still scared, and there's no one actually as powerful as you. I'm not worried about any of the aquatic creatures hurting you. Who are you actually? You must be Vishnu. But there's no one but him who could do this, who has this much power. And he just bows before the fish. And the fish says, yes, I am actually Vishnu. And I've come for a really important reason, which is that we're about to have the pralaya. The pralaya is the huge flood that happens at the dissolution of the universe. And it's about to happen. And I've chosen you to lead a few people out and start the next creation. So you and your brothers, the Saptarishis, which are the 7 mind-born sons of Brahma, and your wives, I want you, in 7 days' time, this huge flood is going to happen. So I want you guys to gather animals, seeds, herbs, plants, whatever is important, gather it all together, take it to the higher ground, and in 7 days, I'll come back for you. I'll send a boat for you, and then I'm going to come back and help you. So he says, okay. So he calls his brothers, and they start to gather things. So they spend that whole week gathering everything they can, all the important herbs and the seeds and the plants and the annual flowers and whatever they can find and animals. And they all start going to higher ground, but rain is starting. It's starting more and more rain, and it's falling and it's falling, and the water levels are rising. The rain's not stopping. It's coming up, and it's getting to where their space is getting smaller and smaller, and the animals are getting crashed. They're all starting to go and get restless, and the water's lapping at their feet. And he's wondering, are we going to be saved? Is this it for us? Well, and they see a boat, and the boat comes out from the horizon and parks itself right there. So they all get on the boat, and they're wondering, how do I know where to go? How am I going to navigate these waters? And the fish comes back, and he's this resplendent, huge, beautiful golden fish. And he has a big horn on his head. And he instructs the sage to take the serpent Vasuki, who's one of the big main serpents of Hindu mythology. And he said, take the serpent Vasuki and use it as a rope, and tie it to the horn and tie it to the boat, and then I'll lead you. So he ties the serpent, and the fish leads them off to the northern mountains, it says. And they're on the northern mountains. They are able to start again, and he becomes Manu, who's the progenitor, like the first man. And after that, so he all human beings come from Manu. So that's the story of the fish. I think I'm at time. Fish. Okay. Fish. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll get into more avatars later.
Yay. So glad we record these, because your knowledge is masterful and amazing. So I want to sing a little blessing song for CJ, so we can, for all of you going off in your day. Go in peace, go in kindness, go in love, go in faith, leave the day behind us, day is done, go in grace. Let us go into the dark, not afraid and not alone. Let us hope by some good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Let us know by some good pleasure safely to arrive at your new home. Love you, CJ. Blessings on your journey. Peace and joyfulness. Yeah, thank you for joining us. And next week, Mark is going to talk about tending the garden of your soul again. We're going to get some more tools for healing and integrating And then Greg Braden on Easter Sunday.
All right.
Love you all. Thank you, Anandi.